Good morning. It's very good to be here and good to be among friends, although of course this is another of those occasions when we're all particularly aware that there is deep sadness and indeed a lot of other emotions at the need to be here at all. Sadness that we live in a society that continues to deploy nuclear weapons and that currently intends to do so for the foreseeable future. I think there's also frustration that this is so when we know that in Scotland public opinion runs counter to the UK political consensus, as do the views of the majority of our elected representatives. There is a sense, particularly in a developing Scottish political scene, that there's a challenge to our understanding of democracy in this issue. And in this regard, there are some other people that I would like to have brought here with me this morning. I would dearly love to have been able to gather, as part of this gathering, the people who make up the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. This year I'm one of about 800 people who will make up the membership of the General Assembly. Half ministers of the Church and half elders, and they're drawn very specifically and proportionally from across the length and breadth of Scotland. There will be quite a number of young people among that 800, but most of us, will not be young. And there will be some very deeply committed activists, but most will not have that appearance or manner. And there will be members of all the main political parties, but most people will have no such affiliation. Although there is a bit of overlap, mostly it's a different 800 people from those who made up last year's General Assembly and from the year before that. And this does mean that it's quite possible that this year's Assembly, which will meet for a week next month in May in Edinburgh, it could make very different decisions from last year's on a whole range of matters that are before it. So it's important, if you want to know what really matters to the General Assembly, that you look for consistent messages that come out of it year after year after year. In recent years, for example, the Assembly has stated again and again that its top priority in allocating resources is the needs of the poorest and most marginalised in our society, and it has bent its budget to that end in remarkable ways. There was a point in the 1980s when the General Assembly began to be consistent in what it was saying about nuclear weapons. And since that time it has become monotonous in its condemnation of nuclear weapons, consistently calling for our government to depart from the holding and deployment of nuclear weapons and calling for the scrapping of the Trident programme and the departure from its renewal. And next month's Assembly will be asked to agree the following: that the General Assembly continue to oppose the presence of nuclear weapons within the UK defence strategy and ask Her Majesty's Government to have the courage to repudiate them, to facilitate international nuclear disarmament. And the General Assembly urge congregations to participate in campaign activities against the renewal of Trident, and in particular to meet with or write to their MP to urge them to vote against its renewal. Occasionally, members of the Church of Scotland write to me to tell me that I don't speak in their name. That's a risk of the job, you know. But I had an email a couple of days ago from one of the most vocal representatives of the Church's theologically conservative wing, saying that he wanted to propose an amendment to what the Council was asking the General Assembly to agree in relation to Trident. It was a very long email and I started to get very nervous until I came to his amendment, and his proposal was to add one word, because he was concerned that we should only be urging congregations in the Church of Scotland to take part in lawful campaigns rather than unlawful campaigns. It is remarkable that in one of the largest organisations of communities in civic Scotland, and one that can present as very deeply divided in some issues, there is such overwhelming unanimity on the issue of Trident and the need to get rid of it, and the sense that the environment for change gives added urgency to getting the UK government to be part of that change now. Our report on the ethics of defence to this year's General Assembly states that a political decision to abandon both the potential upgrading and the eventual replacement of the Trident nuclear missile system is now long overdue. If Britain was to take this unilateral action, then it could start to lay claim to a position of moral and ethical leadership, which the rest of the international community would understand. It's not the case that in repudiating nuclear weapons, the UK would have no voice in strategic international matters. It would have a different voice, uttered from a different vantage point, and it would, I believe, be a more effective voice in the longer term.